Hi there. If you're just joining us now, we're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. We're going to allow some more folks to join. Okay, greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today from wherever you may be joining us. My name is Emily Fritz. I work at the International Students and Scholars Office, and I am very happy to announce Mary Walsh, who is a reputable immigration attorney from the Boston area. She works with Ian Doley, Desai, and Cronin, which is our outside legal counsel, and she will be presenting today on postgraduate immigration options and providing us with some information about what's been going on sort of in the immigration field. So without further ado, Mary, take it away.
Thanks, Emily. Well, thank you everyone for attending today. I always say this is sort of the first step that I recommend for planning your future is just sort of attending one of these events so that you can start to think about after graduation, what's going to be your 1 year, your 3 year, your 5 year plan. So hopefully, this at least gets you thinking. It sparks some questions, which we'll leave some time at the end for, and it gets you planning because, as you may know from friends going through the process, sometimes you don't just get your plan A. You got to kind of come up with a plan B and possibly even a plan C these days, just to sort of make it through the process successfully. So hopefully this gives you a just nice general overview of everything. And we're going to even start the presentation with a lot of questions about, the new administration, how it's going to have an impact over the next couple of years on your transition from F1 student, possibly J, to a work visa and a green card. So I always have to give my little spiel, my little disclaimer that, this is just a generic presentation for educational purposes and information only. So, just be careful. There's no attorney-client privilege that's created in this. And when we do ask questions at the end, obviously all of your colleagues may be listening in. So make sure you don't, put anything too personal in that, in those questions. So let's talk about the agenda today. I first want to just hit on the impact of the election, what that's going to look for you, what the Biden administration might be doing for students, H-1B visa holders, green card, things like that, that may impact you. Just going to touch on, remind everyone about some COVID travel bans and presidential proclamations that are still in place. Then we're going to really spend most of the time talking about temporary work visas. How do you transition off of your F1 OPT, STEM OPT, and any of you who currently are on a J, to probably what we'll spend the most time on is the H-1B visa, but I do want to highlight a couple of the other popular options because, again, you're going to need to come up with a plan B just in case. Then we're going to touch on green cards. Not spend a lot of time, but you can always use, go through the slides later, if you would really like to if you're really more interested in that. But throughout the whole time, we're going to talk about any pitfalls, timing issues, this thing called visa retrogression for some of you, and how that impacts the importance of planning early. So this may sound a little basic, but I always like to just highlight this for anyone attending these, is the government agencies. And you may think, well, what's so important? Well, There isn't just one generalized immigration service who handles everything. There's actually, it's broken up into about 3 different departments, and they all have their own regulations, and you could get stopped along the way and reach a hurdle with any one of them. Even if you get approved by one, you could get denied by another. So you kind of have to see how the puzzle all fits together. So what everyone really considers is immigration service is the Department of Homeland Security. But in fact, underneath it is 3 separate departments. There's U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, and that's really what we call the benefits arm of the government. And that's really if you're going to apply for like your OPT, an H-1B visa, a green card application, those will all be sent to USCIS, and they'll approve it and give you an approval notice. Then there's Customs and Border Protection, and you've all met them. They're the officers at the airports or land borders, and they're inspecting you to make sure that you're admissible to the United States. So unless you're Canadian, if you're anyone else, you have an approval notice, and they take that on its face value, but they're doing, they run you, and every time you enter the United States, they run a security clearance on you, and they're making sure you're admissible. You haven't overstayed for any reason, you haven't violated the terms of your status, you're not a criminal, whatever might make them stop you at the border. And then there is ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. In fact, they manage a lot of your CVIS and your F and J1 records, but most people think of ICE as kind of the law enforcement, the police. Those are really what they're known for, is maybe patrolling at the border, putting anyone in deportation or removal. So hopefully you never actually meet an ICE officer. That's the goal, to get through the whole immigration process and never actually meet one, because if you do, it means you're in a little bit of trouble. Then there's the U.S. Department of State, and that is the agency that manages and controls all the embassies abroad. And they are completely and wholly separate from the Department of Homeland Security. So the agencies try to interact, but they don't really that well sometimes. So sometimes you get some hurdles there where, you might get a petition approved in the United States, but the embassy wants to re-adjudicate it for whatever reason, or has issues with it, and won't approve your visa application for whatever reason. So they are also still making sure you're admissible. And for the most part, they do, most of the time, just take immigration, USCIS's approval, and process the visa. But they can really assess your non-immigrant versus immigrant intent. We'll talk about that a lot throughout the presentation. They can decide if you have enough funds to support yourself while you're here. So, if you've overstayed for any reason, worked without authorization, they're now checking social media handles to make sure that, you're maybe not working or doing something that you shouldn't be in your current status. So, just be wary of that. And then there's the Department of Labor. They only are involved in the H-1B and one of the green card processes. But it is just another department that you kind of have to deal with. A lot of you will deal with eventually. So let's talk about, I always like to look for the Biden administration. What are they doing? What have they done in the last, or I guess their first 60 days, or what did they have on tap to do in their first 100 days? And so the Biden administration has a great immigration website that lays it all out for you. And these are bullets for what they want to do in the first 100 days. And in summary, it's a lot of humanitarian relief efforts, and not really focused, though I'm going to mention a few, but not really focused on the visa or green card process or anything like that. But, day one, when he came in, he, revoked the Muslim ban. He's trying to rewrite some asylum rules that have been changing with the Trump administration to make asylum at the border, a much more humanitarian effort than just creating this wall for Central and South America. He has reversed the policies that separate parents from children when they're entering at the border. So there's a whole bunch of actions that a flurry of actions that he has taken, but so far right now, overwhelmingly humanitarian. So the one exception was last week, the Senate put forth, the U.S. Citizenship Act, and this is actually, pushed by the Biden administration. So what does it do? Again, some of it is focused, it's about 600 pages long, but a lot of it is focused on some humanitarian efforts that won't necessarily apply to you, but creating a roadmap to citizenship for about 11 million undocumented workers in the United States, addressing the root cause of migration from Central and South America, and trying to, if we help solve some of the problems in those countries, maybe there won't be such an influx of migration here to the US. He does want to reform some of the visa processes, and I'm going to highlight the H-1B changes that he wants to make. He wants to increase the number of employment-based immigrant visas or green cards from 140,000 to 170,000 a year. So that will clear up some backlog, especially from individuals from India and China. So that's good news. He wants to eliminate the per country caps for employment-based immigration. We'll talk about that at the green card slides, but essentially there is a preference system for green cards in the United States, and a lot of it has to do not only with what your degree level is, but also what country you're born in. And so if you're Indian or Chinese, you know that this creates a massive backlog for a lot of your categories, because your immigrant rate is higher than other countries. Well, if they make the per cap limits per country go away, that'll reduce the weight for India and China, but potentially increase the weight for everybody else. So it's sort of, but it would be more based on a first come, first serve basis. STEM, PhDs. So some of you may be thinking about going to get your PhD. There's a lot of numerical limitations, say for the H-1B, for the green card I just mentioned. What they would like to do to encourage STEM PhD students to remain in the United States is to eliminate any numerical limitations on these various applications, so that there would be a pathway for PhD STEM foreign nationals that is a little bit faster than everyone else, or a little bit easier at least. He does want to put in place a wage-based H-1B lottery system. So I'm going to talk about that more in depth at the H section. And then H-4 spouses, some of them, a handful of them, can qualify for EAD work cards, but you have to be in the green card process. So it's very limited in scope. He wants to open it up to everyone, which would be huge for foreign national spouses. Now, you don't have to each individually get your own H-1B. Just one of you needs to win the lottery, and the other one could work as an H-4 spouse. So one big thing that also came out, I think about a week ago, which is huge news, is what we call the revocation of, we call it BAHA, Buy American, Hire American. And this came out in 2017 under the Trump administration and really set the tone for walling off the United States from an employment-based perspective. So it attacked the H-1B visa process and has made approval and denial rates skyrocket in the last 3 years. We probably get requests for evidence on half of our H-1B petitions. In the end, they get approved, but you got to really battle it out, and it didn't used to be like that. So this is a huge kind of win for, for everyone going through the employment-based temporary work visa and green card process. But there used to be a deference policy memo where if someone's H-1B had already been approved and they're just extending it, give deference to it, just kind of approve it. Don't re-adjudicate it. Well, they took that away and were re-adjudicating and now sometimes denying the second H, even though the first one was approved. So that's gone away. So that's some very good news for everyone. So, we'll sort of end on that high note of what he's been working on. So let's just sort of touch base and remind everyone of the COVID travel bans, because they come out as presidential proclamations and they've got these in numbers assigned to them. And I will be honest, they make my head spin. There's been, I don't even know, 20 different presidential proclamations that have come out, that have been amended, that have parts of it been rescinded, other parts not. So if you're just as confused, don't worry. Even I have to, stare at it a little bit longer when a new presidential proclamation comes out amending something. So let's boil it down. There is still a COVID travel ban from China, Brazil, the Schengen area, the UK, Ireland, Iran, and now they've added South Africa. So if you have traveled or transited through one of these countries in the 14 days preceding your entry into the United States, you will not be admitted to the United States. So what it means is you either have to, if you're from one of those countries, you have to go quarantine somewhere else for 2 weeks in another country, or you have to qualify for a national interest exemption. So, we're hit or miss on how long they take. They can take up to a month, for some embassies to get, and some embassies aren't even issuing them. So just be very careful if you want to travel home. We're still advising people. I know it's a tough thing to hear, is don't make any travel plans in 2021 because there is no end date to this travel ban. So we anticipate it sticking around for a very long time. And they can always add more countries. They just added South Africa because of the new variant. So if another country gets a new variant that can't be managed by a vaccine, they're going to get added to the list as well. So just be careful. There are, again, some exceptions if you're a permanent resident, spouse of a US citizen or permanent resident, things like that. But I would imagine most of you being foreign nationals will be subject to this. There is also a ban to Canada and Mexico for non-essential travel. It does not apply to F students, so that's a good thing, but it can apply to family members. If they're just coming with you, or they just want to come to a graduation this year, or to come visit you because you can't leave, unless they can prove that it's essential, and it's not just for tourism, they're not going to be admitted here into the United States. And vice versa, it goes the other way. Canada is not allowing tourists or foreign nationals into Canada. So what that means is a lot of times, for various reasons, we'd send clients up to Canada to either get a visa or just to quick activate a status and come back down. We can't do that anymore because we can't get our clients, foreign nationals, into Canada. Mexico is a little bit more lenient, mainly probably from their tourism, that we can still send people to Mexico if needed. Again, this travel ban though only applies to land borders. So if a family member does want to come visit you from Canada or Mexico, you can actually, if you're flying, it doesn't apply, which is a little odd, but so think about it. Think about that one does expire it's like every 60 or 90 days, but they renew it. It's just continually been renewed since March. So we also don't see an end to this in sight anytime soon. There's also still a ban on H-1Bs. I'm not going to get into this because probably none of you are on H's yet, but maybe you're going to go through the lottery. But of course, you won't be on an H-1B until October. So again, it may not apply to you, but we might have a few alumni listening. And the H&L visa ban is still in place till March 31st. But again, I wouldn't be so shocked if they extended it, but hopefully they won't. So those are all the bans. There was recently, there was also a ban on immigrant visas, green cards at US embassies. They have recently revoked the ban, I guess is the phrase I want to use. So they've revoked the ban, and you may think, well, that doesn't really apply to me because I'm not applying for a green card through the embassy. However, because they had that banned since, I don't know, April last year, maybe June of last year, I forget exactly when, there is now a backlog of hundreds of thousands of immigrant visa interviews at embassies. And the embassies are going to have to catch up on that backlog. And they may also then not schedule non-immigrant interviews. They may take people off of the immigrant or non-immigrant visas and put them on immigrant cases to sort of clear that backlog out. So it may indirectly affect you if you need to go home and get a visa for any reason in 2021. So that also leads me to a couple other impacts of COVID. Okay, delays, massive amount of delays. So the embassy, for example, most embassies are not scheduling appointments before fall 2021. And the reason is because 90% of embassies are only offering emergency appointments right now because they can't have full staff. And most appointments you have to go in person, and they can only have so many people in the office. And so you need to qualify for an emergency appointment. And it's a strict standard. It's, humanitarian reasons, it's severe financial loss, but they don't really care, I hate to say, about personal financial loss. If you need to work, they don't really care about that. They mean severe financial loss to like a company or employer. So my company is going to lose a $20 million contract if I can't be employed with them and need a letter from the company saying that. So it's very difficult to get emergency appointments. Maybe if you're doing some sort of COVID or healthcare work or something, maybe, but you're going to have some really good reason. So right now they're only for non-immigrant visas, emergency appointments or those who qualify for a national interest exemption, like if they're from one of those travel ban countries, they may only be taking NIE exemption cases or, again, emergency appointments. So we're also seeing frequent cancellations. So you might get an appointment in your home country and you're like, sweet, I got it. It's like 2 months. Everything's great. I'm going to go fly there. And then they cancel them at the last minute. And the reason is because they're scheduling them, hoping that COVID is going to be better in their country 2 months from now. But then when they get a week or two away and they realize that the restrictions are still in place, they have to cancel all those appointments and reschedule. So just be careful. If you do get an appointment and you decide to travel home, which again, I'm not advising you do that, have a refundable ticket, because there's a very good chance that they're going to cancel your appointment, a week or two. So if you come from a country with very, very, very low infection rates, those embassies might be running at a more steady pace. So you might be in better luck. So there's also heavy biometric delays for EADs, OPTs, STEM OPT applications. So biometrics are needed not just for OPT, but also I-539 change of status or extension applications for dependent non-immigrant visas, tourist visas, for green card applications. There's currently a 1.3 million million appointments that are backlogged that they have to schedule. And they said they're scheduling about 10,000 a day, but if you do the math, that's about 5 months. And that's assuming that they don't need to schedule anyone else. So there's going to be severe delays for at least all of 2021 while they catch up. And that's assuming COVID doesn't get worse again, or we go, kind of slide back and have to really shut things down even more again. There are receipt delays across the board. I filed a whole bunch of green card cases in October for this big rush season. I just got my last receipt this week. So we're talking 3 to 4 months delays on receipts for certain applications. So just be careful. We also see we've seen in the last week, immigration address this, recognize this. On February 26th, they announced some flexibility for certain applicants filing an EAD for OPT. And they basically said anyone who filed from like October 1st, 2020 up until May 1st, 21, they're going to be issuing OPTs for 14 months to sort of, kind of make up for the delays and processing and receipts and everything like that. And they may issue requests for evidence for deficiencies in the applications, where before they would just straight out deny them and there's no appeal process and you lose out on your OPT. That does not mean don't listen to your international student advisors when you're going to apply for new OPTs this year, or STEM OPTs, and make sure everything is signed. We see so many mistakes on OPT applications and people asking, how do I appeal this? It got denied. There is no appeal for an OPT denial, unless it is a huge unforeseen circumstance beyond your control. And that usually is meaning like someone made a mistake in the SEVA system, something like that, that was completely beyond your control. But if you forgot to sign something, if you mailed it a day late, if your filing fee check bounced, they don't care. Denied, no appeal. So really take it very, very seriously as you would a final exam. Spend as much time reviewing it and making sure everything is done properly. Okay, so now that we've gone over some sort of hot topics of the Biden administration and travel bans and delays and things like that, let's get into how are you going to transition off of your F1 or your J. So just a reminder, because I have some people come to me and say, I want to apply for citizenship. And well, you can't really do that in the United States. Not even if you marry a US citizen, you actually have to transition, kind of go through a process of first being a non-immigrant, someone who's temporarily here in the United States. That's what you guys are all now, as an F. And then or an H one day if you transition to an H, or a J or an O or an L, any of the alphabet letters that we'll talk about soon. But then you're going to apply for a green card, whether through the employment-based route or the family-based route, maybe even the diversity lottery route. And once you're a permanent resident for either 3 to 5 years, then you can apply for citizenship. So we're not sure if that's going to change under the Biden administration, but for now, that's what it looks like. So US citizens are either by birth or through this naturalized process. So right now, I kind of want to highlight the difference between immigrants and non-immigrants, obviously permanent versus temporary. And the reason why is for the F1 or Js, it's very critical that you know the distinction, because F1s are very strict non-immigrant intent only visas, meaning if you're going to be an F and try to enter the country as an F or apply for OPT or STEM OPT, and immigration sees that you have a green card case on file, they're going to deny you entry or deny that application. So if you do want to apply for a green card from F1 status or J, you can. There's just heavy travel restrictions and very strict timing rules that you have to worry about. So I would definitely advise, even if you don't hire a lawyer to do the work, maybe at least do a 1 hour consultation with them so that they can walk you through the timing issues so that you don't get stuck in a bad situation. Okay, so the non-immigrant basics. Again, there's the Department of State and the Department of Homeland Security. So there's something called admission and stay in the United States. So if you looked at your I-94 record right now, it's an online record of every time you enter the United States. Because you're F or you're J, it's going to say DS, duration of stay or status. But once you transition to another work visa, in H and O and L, whatever it is, it's going to have a very specific end date, expiration date, and you must depart the United States at the end of that expiration date. So it's very critical that every time you enter the United States, you check your I-94. Make sure they admitted you in this right status. Make sure they gave you to the proper expiration date, because they make mistakes all the time. And you want to get it corrected right away, like within the week of entering. You don't want to unknowingly be here unlawfully because they accidentally admitted you as a tourist for 6 months or visa waiver for 6 months, and really you're on an H for another year and you didn't travel. So you just want to look at it within a week of traveling. Go online, look it up. Just Google I-94 and it'll come up on Customs and Border Patrol's website, CBP's. You can typically change status, extend status, all from within the United States for majority. There's a few exceptions to that, but mostly. So some of you might come on an F and never want to go home. You just don't have a desire. And you could change from F to H to green card and never leave. So it is possible to do. But we highly, but if you do extend your status, for example, let's say or change your status in the United States, and now you're in a new status when you travel, you're going to have to make sure that you allot enough time to make a visa appointment. So that, like if you apply for an H-1B and your status changed to H in the US, the next time you travel abroad, you have to go to an embassy and get an H-1B visa to re-enter on that, because you can't use your F visa anymore. But you also can be in the United States with no valid visa, and that's perfectly okay. The visa is just for travel, just for entry. So if your visa in the United States expires while you're here, that's okay. You'll just get a new one the next time you leave and come in. So here's just a little chart of the most common work visas. And there's actually one for almost every letter of the alphabet. It's just based on like a subsection of the regulation. So there really is an A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, the whole thing. It goes all the way down except for maybe like Z. So we're only going to hit on a highlight of these that are on this chart today, but there are a whole bunch of other ones out there. They can be for religious workers or media. So there's reasons why we left them off, because they most likely do not pertain to you at all. Ambassadors and things like that. So these really are the main work visa categories. So just a reminder, F students, it's non-immigrant intent only, very limited circumstances that you're except in very limited circumstances authorized by your student office. Most F1s cannot work while attending school. There's some, curricular practical training you can do, but it has to be authorized for the school. You can't just go off working or volunteering while you're in school like your US citizen or permanent resident counterparts. There's going to be a lot of opportunities you might not get that your friends might have being a foreign national student, but unfortunately, you kind of have to work within the rules, the regulations. So what employment consequences are there for unauthorized employment? So just be very careful about volunteering if you're engaged as a bona fide volunteer, someone who's not normally paid to do that job. And I don't mean interning at a startup company, because no one at the company is getting paid. That still may be considered work. I'm talking you're volunteering at a hospital or a soup kitchen or some sort of relief nonprofit organization. Passive investments, in the stock market are okay, but owning second property like a apartment building and renting it out and getting income from that is technically working in the United States and not allowed. So there's major consequences for unauthorized employment in the United States. You can lose your status. You can lose future work visas and green cards. So be very careful. I also say be very careful of the side hustle. It's very big today to be doing Uber, Airbnb, maybe some open coding or Poshmark, whatever it is, blogging for which you get like little stipends here and there. Those can be considered work. I mean, that's income that you are receiving that is not related to your degree program. So be very, very careful about this. Also be very careful about what you put on social media, because like I said, everybody leaves a digital footprint. And even now, embassies are asking on your DS-160 application for your social media handles. They don't ask for passwords, but if your profile is public, and they have your handle, they can just go on and look at it. So make it private. I mean, they're not going to like snoop around and see what you're doing on a Saturday night with your friends. But at the same time, don't put yourself out there as CEO of a startup company you're creating and make it public, because they're going to see that and say that's unauthorized work, and they're going to deny you entry or a visa. So just, again, be careful what you put on LinkedIn or any other social media, because it's kind of in our nature to boast and make our CV look as impressive as possible by saying you're interning at this startup company when it's your friend's startup and you're doing this or that. That could get you in trouble. So you really want to be careful what you put out there and what is left on the internet, because they can find it. And it's happened on some of my clients' cases. And it's hard to prove a negative. It's hard to prove you weren't working for something, for someone. It's easier to prove you are with pay stubs, employment confirmation letters, but trying to prove a negative is really difficult to do. Okay, so all of you will get OPT for 1 year after graduating, and a lot of you will get STEM OPT to do, obviously you can look up if your degree qualifies for a STEM program, and you can apply for a 2-year extension. The only thing that's a little bit different is the employer you work for has to be registered with E-Verify. So you want to make sure if you get a job with an OPT employer that before STEM comes around, you ask them if they're registered with E-Verify, because if they're not and they're not willing to join, you better go find another employer, because you'll never get your STEM OPT application approved. And even if you do get a STEM application approved based on an employer with E-Verify, if you want to change employers and they're not E-Verify, your international student office that you have to update them with the new information isn't going to be able to, they're going to ask for, their E-Verify number to make sure that they're eligible. So just keep that in mind when you're job hunting and searching and you're going to use STEM OPT. Okay, so you're on STEM or you're on regular OPT. What do you do now? So the first thing we're going to look at is the H-1B visa, sort of the holy grail of work visas. And one of the reasons is because it allows for dual intent. It allows for you to be a temporary non-immigrant, but also go through the green card process. And so it makes travel and things like that easier. It's easier to change employers and transfer an H-1B and things like that. But there are some hurdles that we're going to go through just to get the H-1B in the first place. So the H-1B must be sponsored by a U.S. employer. You cannot self-petition. So if you want to have a startup, we're going to talk about some entrepreneur issues, but it would be the company that's sponsoring, not you, even if you own a portion of it. It does require that the job be a specialty occupation. And the general definition is that it requires at least a bachelor's degree in a specific field related to the job duties. And you may be like, well, that's easy to prove. Well, that right there is what that Baja Buy American, Hire American memo was attacking, because the Trump administration, they knew they couldn't get new laws passed through Congress. They decided to sort of tweak the definition of or how they interpret it. So they basically are saying they want a much more linear argument, that they want a very strict, narrow field of what is allowed for the job. So if you have if you're a software developer and you have a degree in computer science, pretty easy H-1B. If you are an accountant with an accounting degree, pretty easy H-1B. If you're a market research analyst with a degree, with an MBA, pretty difficult H-1B. And the reason is because a market research analyst could have an MBA, could have a degree in marketing, a degree in entrepreneurship, a degree in management, you name it, psychology. I've done ones for people with psychology degrees for, consumer behavior. It can have a wide variety. And so immigration feels that if the industry accepts a wide variety of different degree fields, it's not a specialty. So just be careful. Typically STEM, jobs tend to be very successful H-1Bs, because if you're a mechanical engineer and you're doing a mechanical engineering job, it's pretty linear. But let's say you're just really amazing at coding and you have a degree in statistics. You went and got a degree in statistics, but now you want to do a job as a software developer. That is going to be a very difficult H-1B, because they don't care about your skill set, which is interesting. They care about just your degree and the coursework that you took. And so if your degree and coursework don't match up with what you actually end up doing as a job, it's going to make for a tricky H-1B. So just keep that in mind when you're searching for a job or when you're graduating. I always tell people, have a minor, have a double major that's in a much more like basic, employable field, just in case you need it. And then if you want to do a second thing on the side that's of your interest, you can do that as well. So employers have to pay you a required wage or a prevailing wage. So they're going to have to prove that they have enough money to pay it as well. So startups can be a little tricky if they don't have funding or don't have any money in the bank to pay you. So be wary of that as well. The benefits can be full-time, part-time. I mentioned the dual intent. You can work for multiple employers concurrently, but they each have to file their own separate petition. So it's just more costly for them. You can study part-time. So let's say you graduate with a bachelor's and you go to work, you could do maybe a part-time MBA in the evening. If the primary purpose of your stay is working, and like the MBA or something, a master's in, a computer science or a master's in management, whatever it is on the side in the evening, that's fine. And H's are not competitive. Some people confuse this with the green card. The green card or labor certification is competitive. They have to recruit and try to find a US worker. And if they don't, then they can sponsor you. They don't have to do that for the H. At least right now they don't. Dependents can get dependent status as an H4. And if everything goes well, Biden is trying to get H4s an EAD to be able to work. And you can get it up for 6 years, and you get a new, as of a couple of years ago, a grace period of 60 days. So if you quit your job or you're terminated or laid off, instead of having to leave immediately, you get 60 days to find a new employer to file a new H-1B or to change your status to a tourist or something like that. Limitations is there's a 6-year limit. You got to figure out what you're going to do in that 6 years and try to get a green card in that amount of time, or at least start the process. So let's talk about some entrepreneurial issues. The reason, again, what I said is that startups, self-employment, all perfectly okay under optional practical training, basic 1-year OPT. Startup activities and working for a startup company, if you own the whole thing, start to get a little bit more difficult at the STEM OPT process, only because you have to prove that you're going and fill out a training program. What are you learning? Who's managing you? Who's mentoring you? If you're the CEO of a startup and it's you and no one else or one other person, that might be a tricky STEM OPT application. And then when you go to transition to an H-1B, you have to prove that there's a valid employer-employee relationship. Basically, can you get fired? So, for example, I rarely will take on an H-1B case where someone owns more than 30%. So if you own the whole thing, nope, I won't do it. If you own 50-50, rarely I'll do it unless you show me incorporation documents that say that you can get terminated. There's a board of directors, all these various reasons. But again, if you own that much of a company, rarely are you going to put that in the incorporation documents to get fired so easily. So if you have there's 3 of you and you each own 30%, those tend to be successful because you got 2 other business partners who could, in theory, vote you out, terminate you, whatnot. So more of an employer-employee relationship. So let's talk about the timing of the H-1B, because right now the employers are kind of divided into two categories: those who are subject to an annual lottery for H's, and those who are not subject. We call it the cap, because there is literally a cap or limit on the number of H-1Bs given out every year. So there's 65,000 H-1Bs for new H-1Bs, and there's for those with a bachelor's degree or a foreign degree, and then 20,000 additional H's for US masters or higher. So all the visas become available October 1st, and they run a lottery in March and allow people to apply who win the lottery between April 1st and June 30th, a 90-day window. And you may think to yourself, okay, well, if H's don't start till October 1st and my OPT one day is going to expire in, say, July, what happens to that gap? What do I do? Well, if you're selected in the lottery, and your company has filed an H-1B for you, if it's approved or pending that petition, you'll have a receipt notice. You give it to the university, to UMass, to their International Student Office, and they will issue you a new I-20 for what's called cap gap. And that basically is a new I-20 that will go from the end of your OPT till September 30th and cover you. You won't get a new EAD card or STEM OPT card or anything. You'll just have this I-20 that essentially extends your OPT, STEM OPT until when the H-1B would kick in. So let's talk about cap exempt employees for just a second, and then we're going to go into more about the lottery. So who doesn't have to go through the lottery? Who can apply for an H-1B year round? As many as they want. Colleges and universities. So if they're going to sponsor you for a job, they can apply year round. Nonprofit organizations affiliated with a college and university. The biggest example in Massachusetts, I'm going to say, are the teaching hospitals, for example. There's a whole bunch, Children's Hospital, MGH, Brigham and Women, Beth Israel, Boston Medical Center. Many hospitals around here are affiliated with Harvard, Tufts. And they have very formal affiliation agreements. And so if you're going to work at a nonprofit like one of these hospitals, you can, and you might think, well, I'm not a physician, I'm not a nurse, I'm not whatever. No, all these hospitals are major employers who all have IT departments, who all have research departments, and might need an engineer of some sort to help create a medical device or something. You never know. They all have marketing departments, communications departments, finance departments, and their finance departments need software developers to develop internal software. So go search these different hospital websites to see if they have job openings, because then you can avoid the lottery. Now, there's also some nonprofit research or government research organizations, a ton in like Cambridge, for example, genomics research, medical research. And again, there are huge research institutions that have various departments that all need developers, software developers, accountants, IT, HR, you name it. They're just like any other company who has all these various job postings. So go check them out and see if, again, they just have to be doing at least 50% or more of research. There's a few others, like if you start a startup and you, let's say, rent space. Like, for example, UMass has a venture development center in Boston. I also think Lowell has one, but I'm forgetting the name of it. And if you have a startup that is part of that incubation space and rents space, you could potentially qualify your employer as cap exempt and sponsor you for an H-1B. So things to think about at least alternatives to the H-1B lottery if, private industry sort of scares you. But let's say you find an employer within private industry, they're not cap exempt. What do they got to do? Well, last year, a new advanced online registration system was created. Back in the day, 2019 and prior, everybody had to file all their H-1Bs between April 1st and April 5th. So immigration received 250,000 H-1B petitions on their doorstep the first week of April. And we waited a month for them to go through all of them and put them through a random lottery. And we'd find out the end of April if they won the lottery, and they'd actually look at the case, or if they just you didn't win, and they would just return the case to you. It was a lot of work. Employers had to pay lawyers lots of money to put together petitions. Well, immigration decided to do an online registration system. Actually went pretty well last year. We were all a little bit shocked how well it went. And what it means is an employer can register you. The dates change every year. This year it's March 9th through March 25th. It's a good, obviously it's kind of like a little over 2-week window for them to register you in the lottery. And the registration, they create a very simple account. It's called a MyUSCIS account. It takes maybe 10 minutes or less to register, to create the account. And then they personally or a lawyer could actually register you. And it's like 6 data points: your name, your birth date, your country of citizenship, your passport number, if you have a master's degree or not, I think your sex, and then that's it. It's like 6 data points. It's pretty easy. And so then we register everybody in that 2-3 week period. But then they run the lottery. It's a blind, other than those little data points, it's a random lottery. They don't know what kind of job you have, who you're, what kind of employer it is, things like that. And they run it, the master's lottery and the bachelor's lottery, the last weekend of March. And we find the very end of March if you've won or not. If you do, then you actually would need an attorney to prepare and file the H-1B petition. And it can still take a month or 2 to prepare. It's not like you're going to be filing it on like April, 5th, right afterwards. You then have to now prepare the petition. They take several weeks or a month to put together, and then you file it. And you get a decision, hopefully between sometime, you can either premium process it in 2 weeks or regular, and you get a decision before October 1st. But in that meantime, you can get that cap gap extension I was mentioning. So last year, a little over 200,000, like 220,000 people applied. So it was about 30 to 35% chance if you were on a bachelor's H. Maybe if you were part of the master's lottery, you had more like a 45% chance of winning. So here you're going to go through a wonderful education in the United States, and you're going to have less than a 50% chance of staying here. So if you have STEM OPT, because you'll have that for 3 years, that gives you 3 chances at the lottery. So that is a huge benefit to STEM OPT. If you don't get STEM OPT, you get 1 shot at this lottery, and then you either have to try for a different work visa, and there's not very many else out there. Maybe go back to school and get a master's degree instead, and or you can always go home and see if a U.S. employer will file an H-1B for you the following year, because you can't do it from abroad. So there is some proposed regulations affecting the H-1B. So right now, the Department of Labor published a rule that's going to go into effect July 1st, increasing the prevailing wages. So what are prevailing wages? Basically, an employer has to show and attest that they're going to pay you what is the minimum wage for your occupation in your geographic location. So I get the question, well, what's the minimum wage I have to get paid for a job? I can't answer that question because it totally depends on where the job is located. Is it New York? Is it Boston? Is it Nebraska? Is it Seattle? And then what is the job and how do we code it? Because as part of the H-1B process, I have to go to the online wage library for Department of Labor, and I have to pick a job that most closely matches yours. And there's only about 200 to choose from. So if you've got a quirky job, you might have to, be classified in a certain way that has an interesting wage associated with it. Software developers, accountants, financial advisors, market research analysts, they have things. But sometimes when we get into business degrees or sales or something like that, it gets a little interesting how we have to code it. So there is just no magic number I can tell you. Roughly speaking, I can tell you I rarely see them for less than like 47,000 in the Massachusetts area for various jobs. And some of them I don't see less than 60,000. If it's a very techie STEM degree, sometimes those are more. I'm talking 47,000 for like a low, some other, like market research analyst or something like that. So I can't tell you what that magic number is. You'd have to, go through the process of having a lawyer do the research on that. So Hopefully, I mean, we're hoping that the Biden administration blocks it or rewrites it, or the wages don't go up, because that's going to, you know, you might think, great, my employer has to pay me more. Well, if it's too much, an employer just might not hire you. So they have to, you know, they can't pay you so much more than what they're already paying their US workers for the same job. So the Department of Homeland Security also issued a rule last year under the Trump administration impacting how specialty occupations were defined, making it very strict, very difficult. The Biden administration did cancel that. And so that's not going to go into effect, which is great. The last one, though, is that a new rule was put into effect, was supposed to go into effect March 8th. Biden administration pushed it off until December 31st, 2021. And it is how the lottery is actually run and who wins it. And so instead of being a random lottery, they don't know what your job is, what your wage is. Instead, it's going to be wage-based, which means they have to attest on their what level. On this online wage library, there are 4 levels, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's supposed to be entry level is typically, let's say, just going to say like software developer, entry level 60,000, maybe level 2, 75,000, level 3, 85,000, level 4, 100,000. I'm just picking random numbers off my head. I don't know if they actually, so don't take those literally. Your employer would have to say, well, what level are they offering to pay you? They don't put your exact salary, just would they be willing to meet a level 4, 3, 2, or 1? And then they have to put that on the lottery. And when they run the lottery, they're going to give preference to anyone being paid a level 4 wage. So obviously that changes by occupation. It's not a magic number because it's going to be different for an accountant versus a mechanical engineer, you know. So, and then are they offering you a level 3, a level 2, a level 1? What that means is everyone who is getting paid significantly a lot of money is going to win, and those with lower level paying jobs are not going to win the lottery. It also is going to benefit those applying from abroad. Those applying from abroad who are like mid-career, you know, they've been doing this for 10 years and now their company wants to transfer them to the United States, or they just want to move here. Well, they've been out of the job for 10 years. Their salary is just clearly that much more. They're probably going to have a higher preference. So I can't tell you if this is going to go through or not, but it was mentioned in Biden's new or the Senate's new comprehensive immigration package, the Citizenship Act that went out, you know, came out a week or 2 ago. So it's looking like there's a relatively good chance it could go through. We don't know exactly how, but something to consider if you're not going through the lottery this year. Okay, so what are some alternatives to the H-1B? The first one, I usually take a poll, like who's from Canada or Mexico, Chile, Australia, or Singapore. If there isn't anyone, I skip over this, but hard to do, you know, virtually. So I'll be quick about it. There are special visas for Canadians and Mexicans. I don't say visas because Canadians are visa exempt. You don't need a visa, but I guess work authorization categories. And so the TN, there's about 63 occupations. So that's not actually a lot of occupations if you think about it. But if you are Canadian or Mexican, I always say try for an H-1B first because of the non-immigrant immigrant intent. TN has a very strict non-immigrant intent only, just like an F does. So if one day you do want to go through the green card process, doing it from a TN, possible, but very heavy travel restrictions and timing issues and a lot of hoops to jump through. So try for an H-1B, but at least you got a TN as a backup plan if an employer won't sponsor you or you've tried for the lottery and you just don't win. There is also an H-1B1 for Singapore and Chile and E3 Australia. It's essentially an H, but no lottery. So you can apply year-round for them, but you still have to prove it's a specialty occupation and your employer still must pay you a prevailing wage. So there's still requirements to it. You just kind of skip the lottery process. Okay, what about an O-1 extraordinary ability visa? You may think, oh, I'm not extraordinary, or I don't think so, but you'd be surprised. So they actually break this category up into 2: sciences, education, business, and athletics, and then the arts. I'm going to focus today, even though I have the arts in there, I'm really going to focus more on the sciences, you know, because if you're maybe have done some engineering or, you know, some sort of even computer science or something like that, and you've got publications and peer review and patents, you know, it's a category to explore. So you still need a US employer to sponsor you. There is something quirky for agents used a lot more in the arts than in the sciences, but potential, a possibility. So I'm going to skip the arts and agent and kind of show you the criteria for the sciences and business. And so really you have to prove that you meet at least 3 of these criteria. So one of them is a receipt of a national or international award, not a student, nothing student related counts for any of these categories. Unless of course a publication while you were a student, that surprisingly counts, but an award or something like that will not. Membership in an association that deems outstanding achievements is a requirement for its members. The example they give are the National Academy of Sciences. Anyone familiar with that knows that you don't achieve that until you've been doing something in your career for like 30 years. So sometimes we're able to use fellowships, prestigious fellowships for that category, sometimes not. So that's one, frankly, the first 2 we don't use very often. Publish material about you. Or your work in a professional. So basically media attention about your work. And you don't have to be named in the article, but your work does. And then we have to draw a link to it. Judge of the work of others. To be honest, peer review doesn't normally happen until you have a PhD. Original contributions to your field. So, that's basically expert letters from colleagues, old professors saying about just how impactful your work is having. If you're doing, again, someone out of a bachelor's program probably isn't going to apply. Someone with a master's sometimes, if you're really productive and you've got 5 to 10 publications. But we generally seem to see someone with a PhD doing an O1 more often than a bachelor's or a master's. Performance in a lead or critical role for a distinguished organization. So again, early on in your career, not really, but a lot of times we're able to get professors or old employers to say that you did this little part of the process of the whole research project that was really critical. And without it, it wouldn't have been as successful. And those, seem to work. High salary is the last one. We don't see that ever really for entry-level positions. So it doesn't happen often. And then patents or grant funding. So just something to consider if you have a master's, PhD, and you've published, not just once or twice, but you've really published 5 or 10 times at least. E1 treaty, traders and investors. I bring this up. This one is one of the only categories other than like the TN for Canadians and Mexicans, Chileans, Singaporeans, those. This is the other one that it depends on what country you're a citizen of. And it actually depends on what country the owners of the company are citizens of and if they match up. So first of all, only 80 countries have treaties that qualify for this type of visa. So click that link or go to it. Like India and China don't. And there's some countries that have an E treaty, but not an E2. So you have to look up your country first. Then if your company is owned 50% or more by individuals from your same country, then now we can go to the final step. Are you doing substantial trade with that company, or is the employer, or has that company made a substantial investment in the United States? So this actually works for if you want to start your own business. But I will be wary, you hear the word E2 investor and you're like, that's perfect for a startup company. The thing is you have to prove that the money has already been invested. Or you're buying like a restaurant or a business and the money's in escrow. And as soon as you get your visa approved, it says in the escrow agreement, the money's gone. So you're going to have to document tens of thousands of dollars that have been spent on the business. So if you're just launching your business in your apartment and you haven't really spent anything, you're just coming up with a business plan and you're getting to the end of your OPT and you haven't really done anything with the business, it's not going to qualify. So again, just consider this as one option for entrepreneurs, or if you just happen to know that the company you want to work for has owners of the same country you are, this might be an option for you. A little bit more info, but we won't get to the nitty-gritty of these. Just know that it might be a choice. This one's my favorite, the L1, and you're going to laugh because you're going to say, well, it doesn't keep me in the United States. Why is it your favorite? Because I'm actually going to send you away. The L1 intercompany transferee is for someone who is working or is going to work for a company abroad for at least 1 year, 365 days. So it doesn't mean you can say you're working abroad and then spend the majority of the time here on business trips. It's you are working abroad for a year and you then are transferred to the US company that is related somehow. So they're either a parent subsidiary or have a common ownership structure, the foreign and the US. This again works really well for entrepreneurs because how much ownership you have is irrelevant. So like on the H-1B, if you have more than 30%, 33 and a third percent, it's going to be a very difficult H. The L, you can have 100%. It does not matter. And so basically you go work abroad for a year, you have to create a legal entity. You can't just go work out of your apartment for the US company. You actually have to establish a legal company there, get paid through that company, and then you can then return to the United States as a manager, executive, or someone with specialized knowledge. If it's your business, you're probably the manager executive. But if you're going to go work for, say, Google in London, you could go work for them and then they could transfer you back as someone with maybe specialized knowledge. So this is a good alternative. There's actually a green card equivalent that is like a fast track green card for managers or executives who do this. So if you go start your own business, work abroad, come back as an L, you can also basically have the US company sponsor you for a green card. Because again, another problem with owning your own company is not just at the non-immigrant stage, some visas don't allow for it. At the green card stage, you can't do it. You have to show that you've gone through a bona fide recruitment effort for a labor certification, which is what most people go through. And you can't do that if you own any more than, say, 5% of a company. It's just not a legitimate bona fide. Of course, they're not going to find a qualified US worker because you own a large chunk of the company. It's slighted in your favor. But I will talk at the green card. There are a few self-petition categories you could go through if you owned your own company. Well, speaking of pathways, so that's most of the non-immigrant work visas, alternatives to the H-1B if you don't win the lottery. Or maybe you just don't want to go through the lottery. Maybe you're just like, I just don't want to deal with the H-1B. We also get this question a lot. Can I just go straight for a green card? Do I have to bother going with an H or a TN or an L? Well, if you have STEM OPT, so that's 3 years, and you are from a country, and we're going to go through the visa that doesn't have a backlog. We're going to go through the visa bulletin in a second. So if you're not from India or China, you're from anywhere else but India and China, you could actually have an employer right out of college sponsor you for a green card and get a green card within 2 years. So it's possible to do. Again, you'll be doing it from F1 OPT and not through like an H. So there's going to be a point where any lawyer helping you is for like a year says you cannot travel. And you just have to, if you're going to skip the H-1B, you're just going to have to, there's going to be a con, and that's the con to just going straight for a green card. But it is possible. Save all the money on the H and just put it towards a green card instead, if an employer is willing to do that. Some employers are like, no, we kind of want you on an H to work with us for 5 years before we sponsor you, because the green card does cost more money. It's a much more complicated process. So it sort of depends on the company you're working for. So pathways to a green card. Again, we're just going to talk about green cards for about 10 minutes, and leave lots of time for questions. But there's 2 main ways someone goes through it. One is the family-based route. So if you marry a US citizen or a permanent resident, you could go through the family-based. But the big one is the employment-based, and that's the one I'm going to highlight for a few minutes. The other one is the diversity lottery. And Trump tried to take it away, but Biden a couple weeks ago said, nope, it's staying around, and essentially it is a lottery. Now, it changes kind of year to year which countries qualify for it, but if you're from a low immigrant rate country, and that can be from Europe, some countries in South America, but it certainly doesn't apply to India, China, Mexico, Philippines, because those countries are high immigration rates. But if you'd have to go look it up, see if your country qualifies, you have to have at least a high school diploma, which you all do, and then you can apply. And some people say, well, can I do that from an F? Yes, they've actually made an exception to the immigrant intent thing, where they said you are allowed to apply for the diversity lottery. There may be a point if you win the diversity lottery, then now you can't travel. But just by applying does not express an immigrant intent, because even immigration it is a long shot, but it's worth trying. I tell clients try every single year, because I do have some clients actually win it every once in a while. So they only give out 50,000 a year. The Biden administration's trying to increase that, you know, by 10 or 20,000, but that's 50,000. You never know, you could get, and it really is just kind of a blind lottery. So you can go to, you know, Google it, go to immigration's website. You apply online at the website. If you ever are on a website where they say pay this, do that, you're on the wrong website. It is not a pay. You don't pay to apply. You don't pay someone to help you apply or anything like that. Those are scams. Make sure you're on a .gov website, and I would definitely say try every single year. And there's a few other lesser known ones. An investment in EB-5, but you got to invest $500,000 to $1 million in a business. And asylum refugee. If you think you may qualify for one of those, you really probably need to speak to an attorney who handles them. So let's talk about the green card process. As I mentioned, there are preference categories, and the phrase EB1, EB2, EB3 that you see here, that really just means employment-based 1, first preference, employment-based 2, so master's degree, employment-based 3, bachelor's degree. So most of them require an employer sponsor. There's only 2 categories who do not, which I'll touch on. I'll just highlight them briefly. But all of these categories are subject to strict annual quotas and backlogs for some that I mentioned. So for example, this is what we call the visa bulletin. You one day, when you decide to go through the green card, are going to live and die by this chart, and it comes out every month in the middle of the month, and then it becomes valid for the first of the month, the next. So like the March visa bulletin came out mid-February, and we're waiting maybe in a week from now, the April visa bulletin will come out and give us a little heads up. So if you look at this, the chart's actually a lot longer than this, but I just kind of took out the categories that are most pertain to you. So EB1, those are people who are extraordinary, outstanding, multinational managers coming from abroad. Then they break it up by all other countries, India, China, Philippines, Mexico. So if you're not from one of those 4 countries, you just fall into everybody else. And as you can see, if you're from, and then EB2 is master's, EB3 is bachelor's. If you go to India and then go down to EB3, it says July 1st, 2010. Like, what does that mean? Well, it means that a green card process is generally multiple steps, like 2 to 3 steps. It just depends on which way you're going. The day you file the first step of the green card process, that is your priority date or your place in line. So someone from India with a bachelor's degree who filed the first step of their case July 1st, 2010, can now file the final step of their green card. It still takes about a year to get approved, but they can file it. That's about an 11-year wait. It's a very long wait. The same with EB2 India, it's about the same. But if you're EB1, if you are extraordinary, outstanding, or a multinational manager, you've got yourself about a 7-month backlog. The all other categories, EB1, EB2, EB3, generally are current most of the year. There's enough green cards. So it's really just China and India that gets the backlog. And China sometimes falls more like in the 3 to 5 year range. India is always kind of at the 10-year range. So that's why planning early, and especially from India and China, getting your place in line as soon as possible is really critical. So I am just highlighting real quick, one of the self-petition categories is persons of extraordinary ability. It's very similar to the O1 non-immigrant temporary category that I was talking about. Very similar. You can see the categories almost read identical. It's just a little bit of a higher standard, to be honest. You know, you might get an O, but you might not get an EB1A extraordinary ability because now this is a green card. So they may be a little more strict on that. But again, if you have a PhD or a master's degree, and then you have lots of publications, we have something for the green card, a rule of 10s around the office. 10 publications, 100 citations, 10 conferences, 10 instances of peer review, 10 media articles. Those tend to be successful EB1A petitions. But you can self-sponsor, you can own your company, ownership's irrelevant. Outstanding researcher and professors, that does have to be sponsored by an employer, and the standard's less. You only need to prove 2 criteria instead of 3 criteria, and it has like a 95% success rate. So if you can get an employer to sponsor you and you have some publications and peer review, that's great. And when I say some, I mean I'll do it for as little as someone with 2, 1 even publications, and they can be successful. So just by having that employer sponsor you, it significantly decreases how much evidence you're going to need. But here's the list here. But most people go through the labor certification or perm. And as I mentioned, you can't have much ownership, really any ownership in your company at all. And then this is where they test the labor market. It's just really what 80% of people, if not 90% of people do to get a green card through an employer in the United States. But it's a 3-step process. You do this labor certification perm, that takes a year, and then you can do the final 2 steps with immigration, and that takes about a year. So just budget 2 years if you're from everywhere other than India and China to go through a green card. And that's assuming everything's running very smoothly. There's no delays by the employer or immigration or something like that. The last category that you can self-sponsor for is the national interest waiver. You must have at least a master's degree, and you have to prove that your work is in the national interest. So it's of substantial merit or importance to the country. You're well positioned to advance your field of endeavor, and that could be based on your accomplishments, so publications, conference, patents, grants, but also you're working somewhere that's, has other researchers doing this type of research, is well funded. So even though an employer doesn't have to sponsor you, if you're unemployed, it's going to be almost an impossible national interest waiver to get. So something to consider if you don't have the high number of publications for like an EB1A extraordinary ability, maybe you have like 2. But you are doing critical work or research, and it doesn't necessarily, maybe you're doing economics research or you're doing something else. It doesn't have to be science or medical related, it could be something else. But again, the work you're doing has to have some sort of impact on the nation as a whole, not just like a small group in Massachusetts. And then the family categories, there's also a preference system, but if you're marrying a US citizen, we call it immediate relatives. So you immediately can file for a green card. You don't have any backlog or wait. And that is, still takes, I would say, in Boston, 6 to 10 months right now, or Lawrence area, 6 to 10 months to get a green card through marriage. But as you can tell, a significantly less time than going through an employer. No pressure, but it is much faster. But if you're going to do this as a student, an F status or OPT status, again, I highly recommend, even if you can file it on your own, which many people can, maybe just have a consult with an attorney to schedule it right, because travel is going to be almost impossible while you're waiting for travel permission, and you also don't want to file too soon after you last entered. That could be an issue. So just make sure you time it right if you are going to try it. But I know I threw out a massive amount of information at you in the last hour and 15 minutes, but we did want to leave lots of time for questions. So I think there's probably some in the chat box that we can go over now. Let's see. All right.
Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to help with the moderating the question. And
oh, great.
Well, I was on mute, so that's kind of what's been happening in 2020 and 2021. So we have one question, and I'm interested to see what your perspective is on this. And I know that we did send something out on this to our students as well. But one question that we have is whether F1 students are eligible to receive the stimulus payment.
They are, yes. It's not considered income. It's more considered a tax credit. So you are eligible to get it.
The next question we have is, can we receive this presentation? And I do want to address that we will actually be posting this on our YouTube account. And that's something that you can also find on our website. And we can also send out an email to any student that registered for this webinar so that you do receive the PowerPoint and the recording as well. Okay. Next question we have here is, I am currently on an H4 visa and I applied for a change of status to F1 in June of 2020 to get eventually to be able to apply for OPT. I'm still waiting on my approval, and now this is my last semester. What if the approval does not come in time before I graduate? Is there any plan B or C that you would recommend? Because I'm on H4, I can't work.
Yes, so I-539 application changes of status. I mean, we have some easily pending a year, sometimes a year and a half. So you know, to be honest, it's, the timing issue on this is really tricky. If it doesn't come by the time you graduate, I mean, you still have some F1 grace. I mean, you're still in a pending change of status. But to be honest, you're gonna have to work with your international student office of if you're able to file an OPT in that time frame. So that I really have to kick it back to the international students office because they manage your CBISH record. But all I can tell you is, yeah, it could easily be where you do not get that approval notice by June, or even July, even August of this year.
Thank you.
So,
Okay. It looks like we have a question here that was a follow-up to something that you may have been presenting. It says, is this bill passed PhD's unlimited green cards? Do we need publications for this or not?
no, so the bill has not passed. First of all, it's only been presented. And I have to make it very clear, even though the Citizenship Act came out, it is very comprehensive and it is going to be a battle in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. Pretty much every comprehensive immigration package that has been presented in Congress in the last 10 years has failed miserably. So if this passes, just because we have Democrats, a majority in the Democrat and the House and the Senate, so it has its best chance in the last 10 years of potentially passing, they could be battling this out for months and months. And when they battle it out back and forth, they make edits. They'll be like, okay, take this out. It's all negotiation. So what's actually in the bill isn't going to look remotely with what the final bill looks like. It's all a negotiation. Okay, we're going to take this out. We're going to take this out. So the STEM OPT may never make its way into the final bill. So, and if it does, it could be 6 months from now. It could be a year from now. We don't really know. So don't count on it. The way it's written, they don't give specifics. The way bills like this are written is that they just give kind of general ideas. Like we want to give work authorizations to H-4 EADs, but the timing and how it is then written in a federal regulations after a bill is passed. So we don't really know the nitty gritty details, just that it may be an option for people in the future.
Great.
I don't mean to be scrolling through. I accidentally hit my, maybe I'll stop sharing my screen. I accidentally.
Okay, the next question we have here is, if I need to go to my country to renew my visa or to get the H-1B visa, could we travel without worrying?
Well, I can't, no, I know you definitely need to worry, but mainly because I don't know where your country is. If it's a country that's on one of the travel bans, then yes, definitely need to worry because now you have to figure out some sort of quarantine to get back. You got to go through another country for 2 weeks or qualify for a national interest exemption. If you aren't from one of those travel ban countries and you just need to renew a visa, you could get stuck there for months and months trying to get an appointment because it's emergencies only. So be very, very careful. That's why, I'm really telling people, don't leave unless it's in a real family emergency, because getting appointments are not guaranteed. If you need a new visa, especially if you have a valid visa in your passport, like an F, and you're going to a country that doesn't have a travel ban, we have had clients successfully go and come back and it hasn't been an issue because they have the visa and they're not going anywhere that there's a ban. But everybody else who's going to one of those countries with a ban or needs a visa have all been stuck abroad for months.
Thank you. What situations apply to humanitarian reasons?
Yeah. It is strict. When we say it's like humanitarian reasons, they don't define them. First of all, there is no definition of a humanitarian reason. So sometimes under that, like if you're doing very important research on COVID or something like that, we'll claim that that's a humanitarian reason because right now you could be saving lives, if you're working for an employer. And you need your visa to get back in to finish, some COVID research that you're doing. But there is no definition for it. It generally is just trying to make a claim that your work is helping some human population. And that just tends to be more medical related, we see that a lot more often, but it could expand to if your company or your work is involved with, it's like a nonprofit and you help asylees and refugees, or you help, I don't know, let's say in Texas, your company helps do disaster relief and they really need you and you're a disaster relief programmer. So it just varies very widely, but
Great, thank you. Okay. We do have a question that says, how does this apply to STEM? But I'm not sure we have enough context there.
yeah.
Okay. Oh, it does have a follow-up question though. It says the USCIS amendment of the 14 months.
Yes, it applies to any OPT EAD application. Well, no, I mean, I guess I should say it applies to the 14 months that you're talking about, sorry, applies just to the initial 1 year, 12-month OPT.
Okay, we have a question here that says, my country of citizenship is Burma. Unfortunately, my country is going through a tough time with military unrest. My question is, if my green card is accepted by NVC and I have to go for the interview, does US Embassy make an emergency interview for me because I am working in the US, or will they make a virtual interview for me?
I have not heard of any virtual interviews. Now, to be honest, the immigrant visa process at embassy shut down right when COVID started last, like April. So, and they were banned. All immigrant visas at the embassy have been banned since last April, May, just until like a week ago. So the embassies are just reopening for them. So first of all, you probably may not get an appointment for anywhere from 6 months to a year as they slog through those backlogs, and unless your appointment's already been in the queue for 2 years. But with that said, they haven't mentioned anything about now doing them virtually. There's a very good chance they're still going to make you fly home and do the appointment actually in person that's why they shut down entirely for a lot of it. So I don't see them doing them virtually, but there's been no guidance technically on it yet.
Great, thank you. Okay. If I travel outside of the US to renew my student visa, but I've applied for the diversity visa, is there a chance to get denied?
No, they definitely have made it very clear for years and years that diversity lottery is not a reason to deny for immigrant intent. There's a question, just so you know, on the DS-160 that says, have you applied for an immigrant visa? You can mark no. Entering yourself in the diversity lottery is not applying for an immigrant visa. It's technically a very different thing. When you win the lottery and you apply to actually, get the green card, now you're applying for an immigrant visa. But if you've just applied and entered your name, you can mark no to that question on the DS-160.
Great, thank you. Is it allowed to trade cryptocurrencies or other stocks in the US? Great question.
I mean, yes, passive investments, which we consider like the stock exchange, are okay. I mean, to be honest, no one's ever asked me about cryptocurrencies, and I don't know the difference really between cryptocurrencies and just the stock exchange. But I guess if you would equate it to owning stocks in the stock market, then yes, passive investments are okay.
Great, thank you. Okay, we have a question here that says, can you explain the H-4?
Well, the H-4 is simply if you're married to an H-1B visa holder or someone who's applying for the H-1B as their dependent, you can get an H-4. Now, as of right now, H-4s can't work, but they can go to school. And you basically just get to live with your spouse in the United States on an H-1B. And every non-immigrant visa has a dependent category. So like the F-1 has an F-2, the J-1 has a J-2. The TN technically has a TN. They just call them the TD. The O1 has an O3. So all non-immigrant categories have a dependent that's for their spouses. And that's essentially what the H-4 is.
Great, thank you. Okay, is there a minimum salary requirement to qualify for an H-1B?
I'm not going to be able to say that. because I don't know. Yes, there is, but I can't give you that range. It depends on the job, the duties, how it's coded with the Department of Labor, and where you'll be working. So there's too many factors. You'd actually have to hire someone to actually do the research to figure that out.
Excellent, thank you. How about the one who had H-1B before?
So if you've had an H before and you went to school, maybe went back and got a master's in the United States, and then now you have an H, you're able to use what's called remainder time, or whatever's left. So as you know, if you've gone through the lottery, a cap subject lottery, if you had a cap exempt H before, this does not apply because you never went through the lottery. But if you went through the lottery and worked for a cap subject employer, and let's say you worked for them for 2 years, you still have 4 years left of your total 6 years of H-1B time. That new employer can file an H and ask for the remaining time. You don't have to go through the lottery again. So it is a huge benefit if you've already been through the lottery and used part of it. Now, if you've used all 6 years of your H before, and then you just went back to school at the end of the 6 years, you'd have to go through the lottery again. But if you didn't use up 6 years, you can use what's left, the remainder time.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, we have a question here. We have a student that is in the Peace and Conflict Studies program, so conflict resolution, and they're wondering if they apply for an internship at the UN, could they sponsor for an H-1B?
Most government agencies like the World Health Organization, the UN, they have a special visa called the G4. So most likely, I guess if you went on their website and Google or search G4, they probably have a whole website dedicated to it. So most likely you would not be on an H-1B. But the G4 is great because there is no lottery, but it's only allowed. The G4 is only available to very specific finite organizations, like global organizations.
Great, thank you. Okay, can an employer apply EB-2 national interest waiver directly after OPT? And follow up, how long does the process take?
So yes, so they can sponsor you and you can file it, right after you start working on your OPT. The national interest waiver does not have premium processing, and so many people have tried to apply in that category that currently it's like a 12 to 18 month processing time, and there's no way to speed it up. If the administration allows for premium processing, and they've mentioned, maybe you can't count on it, but they've mentioned allowing national interest waivers to premium process, hopefully in the future. But right now it's 12 to 15 months for the national interest waiver, plus another 6 to 8 months for the final stage of the green card. So you're looking at easily 2 to 2.5 years. So you really would want to apply for it like right after you get your OPT, so you have a decision by the time your OPT, and if you have STEM OPT, expires. If you don't have STEM OPT, you just have regular OPT and you have 1 year. When you apply for any green card, the final stage, the adjustment of status, you can apply for also an EAD card. They take 6 to 8 months right now. They used to take 3, but they also are super, super slow and delayed because of biometrics. So if, let's say, you only had 1 year of OPT, you'd want to file a national interest waiver and the rest of the green card, 6 months before your OPT expired, 8 months before your OPT expired, to be safe, and you'd get an EAD card, and you could work on that while the national interest waiver was taking forever. Again, this only applies if you're not from India or China. If you're from India and China, this won't work for you.
Okay, great. Okay, I have 2 questions. I applied for OPT in November, but I got a rejection notice last week because I did make a mistake on one of the forms. So I corrected it and I sent it back to USCIS to the PO box in Texas. My first question is, how long is it going to take to get my EAD card? And second is, I sent it through USPS because it's a PO box, and I made sure that the receiver should sign before receiving. What if nobody is there to receive it?
So first thing, my first advice to you is, if you haven't taken this to your international student office, go take it to them to make sure what you refiled was actually correct and within the dates, the amount of time, because you may have needed to have a new I-20 signed. You may needed some, I mean, a lot of time went by between November and February, what March, whatever time frame it was. That I-20 that you initially filed within November may not be valid anymore. You may be beyond certain dates. So that's the first thing I would do Monday morning. Go call them and make sure you set up an appointment to go over it. 2, there was that leniency memo that just came out that might cover you, but your student office will know more about it. So, you know, when it comes to how long will it take to get your EAD card, you just refiled it. It could still take 6 to 8 months. And second, for anyone who is filing for OPT or you haven't filed yet, I would highly recommend using FedEx, DHS, or UPS and having a confirmation. Do not send through the US Postal Service. I mean, the US Postal Service is severely backlogged. It could take weeks and weeks for them to deliver something. So, and you really don't get, I mean, you can say, so there are non-PO box addresses you can mail these applications to, and your student office, I'm sure, has it in their list of, you know, instructions. So I would probably assume this application was not refiled correctly. I would go to your student office and let them maybe help you reapply for it on next week, just to make sure. So.
Yeah, feel free to, you know, to call us Monday morning and we'll be happy to set something up with you to discuss your options moving forward. Okay, let's see here. We have a question. How does a spring graduate get 3 chances if they get the first EAD of post completion is after April?
This is a very good question. So if you're a spring graduate or a December graduate, for example, you're not going to get as many chances at the lottery as someone who graduates in June. It's sort of the system, the way the dates play out, it benefits those who graduate normally in May or June timeframe. So let's play that out in 2 different scenarios. Let's say you're a December graduate and you get your OPT in like February timeframe. Well, when you go, you're still going to be able to enter the lottery and file your application maybe in, I want to say, let's say you get your OPT February 15th. Let's just use that date. Well, when you go to file your H-1B the next year, so if you don't have an employer actually enter you in the lottery, like a month after getting your OPT, you know, like they're just not ready yet. They don't know you well enough when you next get it, and you have to wait for the following year. You could still get entered into the lottery, even though your OPT is expired, you know, by a month. You could still enter yourself in March, and you could still file your H-1B petition before April 1st. It'd only give you 2 weeks if you won, and you could stay in the United States because you're in your 60-day grace period between February 15th and April 15th. But you're not going to be able to work. You're not going to get that cap gap because you have to be able to file your OPT application or your H-1B application even a day before your OPT expires to get that cap gap. So if you are a spring graduate, and I don't really know when spring graduates, usually I only see like December graduates. So
around like May 15th.
May 15th. Okay. If you get your first, you know, if you're spring graduate, you know, May 15th, usually you get your OPT in the summertime, not your first EAD. I'm trying to read the question again. If they get the first EAD post completion after April. The timing doesn't quite work out for me. First EAD post completion. I mean, if you're a spring graduate, you're probably getting your EAD in the summertime, in recent years in the fall, like even up to September or October, because they're just taking so long. And you'll have, you know, summer to fall if you're a spring graduate. And then you don't really enter. So you're kind of entering yourself not in the year you're graduating. You could enter yourself in the year you're graduating. If you found an employer, if you're a senior and you found an employer who really did want to sponsor you for an H early, they'd have to register you in March. They could then file the H-1B for you after you graduate. So if you graduate, May 15th, they would have between May 15th and June 30th to file your H-1B application. And it's almost, you'd be filing an H before your OPT even came through, and that's perfectly okay. You may never, and then you'd use your OPT for a little bit of summertime to the fall. But that's really the 3 years, the traditional 3 years on STEM OPT is you file for your first lottery after you've been working for 9 months. You've been working from summertime till March, and you apply for that. Then you can apply for it a second, and then you apply for it a third time a couple months before your OPT, your STEM OPT is expiring, and then you get cap gap. So your OPT ends up being good for more like 2 or 3 years and 3 or 4 months. So I don't know if I exactly answered your question, but you definitely do get 3 chances at it, maybe even 4 chances at the H-1B lottery if you can find an employer who's willing to sponsor you in the lottery the year you're graduating.
Great, thank you. Okay, are PhD students in computer science able to get green cards before graduation?
Technically, yes. So if the job requires a master's degree, they don't need a PhD. It's all depending on what your employer requires as for the job. So if the employer requires a master's degree and some special skills or any sort of work experience, they could apply during your PhD program, because a green card is forward thinking. What job are they going to offer you the day your green card is approved? So what you're doing in the meantime, you don't even have to be employed with the US employer. In fact, employers can sponsor you for green cards when you live abroad and you work abroad. It doesn't happen very often because most employers aren't going to spend the money to sponsor someone if they're not even physically in the United States, but sometimes we have to do it, especially for big multinational companies. Maybe they're working for the foreign subsidiary abroad. But so think of it as a green card as perspective. When the green card's approved, what are you going to be doing for a job? But you have to be qualified for it at the time of filing, not when you get it, which is a little weird. So if an employer says, hey, in a year and a half, 2 years, we're going to give you a full-time job, they could start the green card process while you're still in your PhD program. But the job can't require a PhD. You would then have to be done with it. So it's a little yes or no. It depends.
Great, thank you. Okay, question. I have spent 10 years studying in the US and haven't left recently for almost 3 years. Can I have permanent residency?
So as of right now, I mean, you don't get permanent residency based on just by living in the United States. Someone has to sponsor you, either through family or through employment. So unfortunately, just the amount of days here, not yet. The Biden administration is thinking about changing that, but I don't think it's just going to apply to everyone. It could be if you were a dreamer or a DACA or some sort of, for humanitarian reasons. But for the most part, you have to be sponsored.
Great, thank you. Hi, Mary, how can we reach you for consultation? Do you have a LinkedIn?
So I do, but to be honest, the easiest way to reach me is probably my work email, which is walsh@iandoli.com. There's also another email called info@iandoli.com. And that email actually goes to all the attorneys, because there are times of year where I'm so busy I can't offer consultations or I can't take on new casework because we get so big, but other attorneys might be available. Their work, that their caseload just isn't as high. So sometimes emailing info@iandoli, then we all are sort of grabbing it based on, everybody has a different day. So you'd still might be able to have a consultation with another attorney as well.
Great. And Mary, just to confirm, it's info@iandoli.com?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, I'm actually going to put that in the chat, folks, as well. There we go.
That's it. That's great.
All right, we have, I missed part of the session, but I want to apply for a green card based on academic merits. So probably EB2 post PhD. And my STEM extension is under processing these days. Should I wait till post OPT, till my STEM extension kicks in before filing for the green card?
Yes, definitely. So I'd wait until the OPT has been approved, because when, you know, they can technically, when they go to, you know, review it and adjudicate it, you know, look you up and see that you have a pending adjustment of status, and they could deny your STEM OPT. So probably best to wait until it's approved, and you can file it a day later. You know, you can have it all prepped and ready. They take months and months to prepare, so you don't have to wait. Get it all ready to go, and then just time it just right until after your STEM OPT to file.
Great, thank you. Okay, will this presentation be posted on the ISSO webpage? Yes, it will. It will be on our YouTube page, and it will also most likely land on the forms section of our website. If you'd like a copy of the presentation now, we feel free to send us an email at issa@uml.edu, and we'll be happy to share that with you. But we will be also posting the recording as well. Okay, let's see. I and my wife holding F1 are F1 visa holders. We have a daughter who is a U.S. citizen. Can I be a resident due to the fact? Actually, I'm having a hard time. Let's see. Can I be?
I know the answer to that question.
Okay.
Can you be a resident basically based on your child without waiting?
Yes.
No. A U.S. citizen child has to reach the age of 21 before they can sponsor their parents for permanent residency and citizenship. So just because you have a U.S. citizen child, you will never probably get a green card that way. You'll get it long before through something else, employment, some other pathway.
Great. Thank you. Okay. I have a question. What if my employer, I think it's supposed to say, has never filed or registered for H-1B? Can he still register it without filing for LCA?
Yes. So the registration process, very simple. Really, they just put their name and email. I don't even think they put their address, maybe their federal, like, you know, FEIN. And then they enter in all of your personal data in the registration. Probably takes no more than 15 to 30 minutes. They've never had to have done it before. In fact, as of last year, we register new companies all the time. So definitely get their name in there. But eventually, if you are selected, then they're going to have to do an LCA and things like that. But just the registration doesn't require one.
Makes things easier for sure.
Yes. But with that said, just generally, I didn't mention it, we're probably over the next couple of years, don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but we're going to see registration lottery numbers go up, because now that it's so easy for employers to do, and they don't have to pay a lawyer all this money to prepare a petition that's just going to get rejected, we're going to see numbers increase, because they're going to be like, oh yeah, we'll register you, no problem. So be wary that, you know, it's a 35% chance if you're a bachelor's, 45% chance if you're a master's, but those chances may go down over the next couple of years as the lottery numbers start to go up, you know, 220, 250, higher, 300,000, because it's easier.
Great, thank you for explaining that. Okay, when is the best time to apply for OPT authorization if I plan to graduate in May 2022? So I'm happy to answer that one. You can apply for OPT, post OPT up to 90 days prior to your completion date. If your completion date is not currently reflected on your I-20, it would be shortened at the time that you would apply for OPT. The completion date listed on that I-20 is just going to be an estimate at this time, and it would always be updated based on your academic completion. So that's 90 days before. Awesome. Okay. How much time does it take to get a transfer from the J1 visa to the F1 right now due to coronavirus?
Well, this is where you have to file one of those I-539 change of statuses applications that require biometric. Well, not all of them do, but some of them require biometrics. I mean, those applications are taking easily over a year right now. Easily. And that's one of those things where pre-corona time, we'd advise people don't even bother doing it. You'll never get your F in the time frame that you want it. Just travel, come back. But, you know, traveling right now, trying to get a visa appointment, almost impossible. So people are getting stuck doing the I-539 process, but it could be a year easily.
Thank you. Okay, which do you recommend, the NIW or employment-based?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends. If you do an NIW and you self-sponsor, you can move employers while the case is pending. You're not tied to them. And national interest waiver, as I mentioned, can take easily 2 years right now because there's no premium processing. So you're stuck with that employer. If you want to leave, your national interest waiver gets, revoked, denied. I mean, you're not working for that employer anymore. So, but with that said, sometimes it can make for a stronger case. If you kind of have a weak case, or you're like, I definitely want to work for them for a long time, don't worry. Then I'd say have the employer sponsor, because it adds a little weight to the fact that you are in a well-positioned, you are well positioned to advance the field because you have an employer who's willing to, support this research or work or whatever you're doing, and they're attesting it on the application. So it just depends on your willingness to stick it out with that employer long term.
Great, thank you. Okay. So I am from India and a doctorate nurse practitioner student. What are the options for green card?
Typically, nurse practitioners, doctorate nurse practitioners, they all go through the labor certification process where an employer would sponsor them, try to find a minimally qualified U.S. worker, which for nurses isn't, there is sort of ways, there's parts of the green card you can streamline for nurses for certain categories. It's called a Schedule A perm, if we want to get technical, which means you may not have to do full recruitment and things like that. So you definitely would need to speak to a lawyer. They're very specialized cases, but there are ways to where you're not, because it's like what's the word I'm looking for? It's an industry that is, the word is losing, I'm forgetting the word right now, but there's not a lot of nurses. There's not enough in the United States right now, that there's kind of a streamlined path to the process called a Schedule A that you could do. But being from India, you could still have a very significant wait. You're still going to be subject to the backlogs, unless you can prove that maybe you've done publications in your nursing, related to nursing or something like that. You might be able to get an EB-1A green card and self-petition for it if you have separate credentials that you might have done during your program. But otherwise, you're going to need a sponsor, and there still could be significant backlogs.
Thank you. Okay. So if I have a PhD and also a full-time tenure track position at the university, would EB-1 be better than EB-2 national interest waiver, which is quicker and which is more safe?
EB-1B, outstanding researcher professor for a tenure track role, hands down. 95, 99% success rate. You don't need as many qualifications as a national interest waiver, and you can premium process it. So again, depending on what country you're from, if you don't have a backlog, you could have a green card in less than a year. A national interest waiver is going to be 2, so it can shave off half the time. And if you're from India or China, you definitely don't want to do an EB-2 because you've got a really long backlog. You definitely want an EB-1B, but.
Right. Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Can you highlight some visa options for non-STEM OPT students?
So all the visa options are the same. The H, the L, the TN. The only thing that benefits a STEM OPT is that they get 3 chances at that H-1B visa. But a non-STEM degree, you still are going to want to try for an H, and you still have, depending on what country you're from, TN, Chile, Singapore, some special visas, an L or an E or an O. But those are kind of it. There's no special, the other visa categories that really are related to what organization you're working for, like if you're an ambassador, if you're something like that. So if you don't fit into one of those like H, TN, L, E, O categories, those are really it for work visas. And it doesn't matter what your degree is in, just STEM gets you 3 chances at an H instead of 1.
Great, thank you. Okay, this is a similar question to what we had before. I have a child that's a U.S. citizen, and they are going to school here in the U.S. Am I eligible to apply for the green card?
Well, not based on her. No. So you're eligible to file it, but again, just like anyone else, you'd have to be sponsored by an employer or qualify for one of those self-petition categories.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, I am currently on F1, but my spouse is on an H1. His company has filed for a green card. We are still waiting on the confirmation from USCIS. Will it affect my F1 OPT process in any way?
So at some point in the green card process, depending on which path they're doing, you're going to file an I-485 adjustment of status to permanent resident application. Your spouse will, and you will, and any kids you have that are non-US citizens will also. So as soon as you file that I-485 application, you're not going to be able to get OPT. You're not going to be able to travel as an F1. They're going to be free to travel under H-1B. You're not. So you have to talk to their lawyers and time it, let them know what status you're in and time it perfectly. Now, as part of it, the green card, this I-45 application, you will be applying for an EAD card based on that. They take 6 to 8 months, but so does OPT, I feel like these days. So you just, again, you just have to time it just right with them about maybe you wait to file your I-45. If your OPT is in process, like you filed it a month ago, you maybe want to wait to, let that get it. And then the next day file the green card. Or if you have time, you file the green card. So it all just depends on the timing, but you really talk to their lawyers and they'll time it just right for you. But it may require you guys filing at different times.
Excellent, thank you. For students who are on F1 and applying for OPT or EAD, do they need to go for biometrics too? I don't believe so, no.
No.
Our PhD students, okay, we did already, that looks like that's a duplicate question. I'm just gonna go ahead and dismiss that. Does all nonprofit organizations, small or big, come under the CAP exempt category? And how would we know if we qualify for being CAP exempt?
So no, that's a good question. So you either have to be CAP exempt and affiliated with a university. And when I mean affiliated, I mean a very strong formal affiliation agreement, or a nonprofit engaged 50% more in research. So there isn't necessarily some giant database that, I have heard that there are some websites out there, like forum pages where people have started to gather that information. But I personally, I don't go to it. I don't know it, but I have heard from clients that these do exist where someone is trying to sort of like list every employer out there and if they may be CAP exempt or not. So you could Google around for it, but there is no like official database by the government that keeps record of all of that. But if your nonprofit is affiliated, it doesn't matter the size, big or small, with a university, yes, they're CAP exempt. You have to show and submit the formal affiliation agreement. If they're a research organization, you kind of have to do a little digging. You kind of have to, I'm doing one right now where I have to argue that this company does at least nonprofit, does at least 50% research, because they also have client, they also service clients as well, but they have a research department, that does a lot of community outreach, and they do a lot of presentations and, educational activities, and they're grant funded. Some of the grants fund this research. So you have to almost prove to the government that they're a research organization. It's not just like they're a box checked on their tax returns that says that they are a research organization. So it gets a little, you have to get a lawyer to help you prove that. So it might be a little digging involved.
Great, thank you. Can you, apply for STEM OPT with a pending H-1B application?
It is possible, though I've heard from student advisors that sometimes in the CVIS background, it might look confusing for CVIS. So I can't comment on that, but technically, legally, you can, and I do recommend it because not every H-1B application is approved. So, you could get a really nasty request for evidence and a denial if they don't believe it's a specialty occupation job. So I would recommend applying for it. But again, you're going to have to keep your school abreast and your attorney abreast that you're doing both, because it may require a withdrawal of your STEM OPT application. Because If the H gets approved and the STEM's still pending, and then they go to approve the STEM, it can cause problems within CVIS. So you just want to make sure that, you know, you're keeping everyone involved and getting advice on if you have to withdraw it if necessary, because you don't need it anymore.
Yep, we advise very similarly. We say, you know, if you are eligible to apply for STEM, then we would encourage that just in case anything does happen with the H-1B, but it's so important to also check in with the immigration attorney that's filing it, just so because they are very familiar with the application. So we want to make sure everybody is in the know of what's happening, and just like you said, the timing is so integral. So great. Do students need to return the stimulus checks received?
No, it's coded as like a tax credit and not an income, so you can keep it.
Great, thank you. I am a master's student from UML. It has been more than 102 days, and I am still waiting on my approval notice for post-OPT. Is there a way for USCIS can issue an interim work authorization based on receipt notices? I already have a job offer and I've been waiting for more than a month. I'm happy to take this one, Mary. Unfortunately, there's really nothing that we can do to speed up that process. They're working as quick as possible. We know that they, you know, I was reading a memo the other day that they are increasing staffing, and I know that this delay is extremely frustrating as you're waiting and you're trying to, you know, take that job offer as soon as possible. But unfortunately, you know, we're just going to have to be as patient as possible to you know, to get that approval for your EAD. It sounds like so more than 102 days. That's not too much out of the normal processing time, to be honest. We've seen it where it's gone up to 120, 150 days at times. So we usually say that the standard, depending on the time of year, is around 90 days, but it's not atypical for it to go up to 120 days or more. So I wouldn't be particularly concerned if you're at 102 days. I would say, you know, hopefully you do get it before 120 days. And feel free to add anything there, Mary.
No, I totally agree. And there's no way to expedite it. I mean, technically you can request an expedite, they'll just deny you. I mean, to be honest, you don't meet a humanitarian need, a loss of a job offer doesn't meet the, you know, expedite, you know, require or criteria or something. So I've never seen really basic EAD applications win an expedite request.
Right. And I do have to say, like, as my role advising students, I know students get very anxious about it, but I've never actually seen an employer rescind a job offer based on waiting for an EAD. So traditionally, employers are very understanding. They know that you're really at the mercy of USCIS adjudicating that application. Great. Okay, EB1B for managerial position in multinational healthcare company.
It's possible for an EB1B, you have to show that it's a research position. And it doesn't mean you're necessarily doing the day-to-day research. Maybe you're managing the research, you're overseeing it, you're helping with IP strategy, you're helping with getting grants or funding or licensing or whatever. So it is possible to do. You still have to meet minimum qualifications, like you still need publications and peer review for maybe your PhD past life or whatnot. But it is possible. You just want to focus that the position itself is somewhat research related, like even if it's you managing it.
Great, thank you. Okay, if you were to choose between doing NIW while you are at a certain job or choose a job which provides employer-based green card.
Well, I mean, it's tough. Both processes are going to take at least a year. I mean, sorry, at least 2 years. So it's not like one is over the other. Probably an employer-based green card, like a labor certification, they have a very high success rate. I mean, they're like it over 90% success rate, as long as, you know, all the recruitment was done properly, you know, they're using a good lawyer, that everything is done. The actual approval rate is very high on them. Where a national interest, there's a lot more subjectivity. You know, what are your credentials? What is the job you're doing? Things like that. You're putting it in the hand of a singular officer, feeling like is your job in the national interest. So they have like a 65 to well, maybe like a 70, low 70s% rate right now for approval. Now, granted, a lot of people overuse that category and just throw their name in, like a last ditch effort, throw their name in, and they really have no business applying for one. So it makes the overall rating go down. But, you know, I would probably say a perm, but again, you got to be willing to stick it out for them for at least 2 years to get through the process.
Right, thank you. Okay, could you please repeat the part about H-1B being non-competitive, but including a lottery and requiring company sponsorship? Which part of the process of H-1 and green card requires company sponsorship and which doesn't? I was a bit confused.
Okay. When I use the phrase non-competitive, I mean, for the H-1B, they don't have to try to find a US worker to fill the position first, where they do for a green card. So you sort of take that out of it, where they have to, you know, put the job up in the Boston Globe and see if they can hire someone first. You don't have to do that for the H. So yes, the lottery is competitive, you know, so if you think about it that way, you're competing with other foreign nationals, but you're not competing with US workers. At no point during the H-1B does the employer have to explain why they want to hire you over a US worker. That does not exist in the H-1B, but it does exist in the green card process. They do have to try to find a US worker and then explain to the government that they didn't and why the people weren't qualified for the job that did apply. So that's where when we phrase it as non-competitive, you're not competing with US workers. But yes, H-1B, a lottery, and requires employer sponsorship no matter what. The green card, not a lottery, but you are competing with US workers, and most of them require US sponsorships unless you qualify for one of the self-sponsors because you've got so many credentials, you know, so many publications and peer reviews and things.
Okay, great. I'm currently on 1 year of OPT. Can you speak to how long the process takes to switch to an H-1B?
Well, so, I mean, the process is you have to register in March. So if you are on OPT that's expiring this summer, you need to find an employer to register you in the next 3 weeks. And if you miss the 3 week, if you miss March 25th, you're not getting an H-1B. And if you only have 1 year of OPT, you're done, you're leaving the country. So if you really are on 1 year of OPT right now, you have a limited time. So the process is they register you in March. If you win, then sometime between April and June, they apply for the H, and sometime between June and October, the H gets approved. So it's like 3 different sort of steps along the way, really 2, but it's sort of spread out sometime between March and October. But the process itself, like the registration, you know, it doesn't take that long. You just have a very finite window to do it.
National interest waiver is country-based or not, and can we file through our employer?
So it's not country-based. Anyone from any country can do it. I just don't advise doing it if you're Indian or Chinese, because it's in the EB2 preference category with 4 to 10 year backlogs. So but there is any country can do it. It's just you have to prove the work is in the United States' interest that you're doing, not, you know, your home country's interest. And you can apply through an employer. It does make it stronger, but if your employer is going to sponsor you for a green card, the labor certification, where they try to find a US worker, because let me tell you about the labor cert real quick. You may think, oh, they're going to try, you know, the economy's down, they're going to find a US worker. The system was designed 20 years ago. You have to do 6 recruitment steps, and the recruitment steps are like a Sunday Boston Globe article or a radio ad or a newspaper, like a Herald ad on a Tuesday. Who is reading that? Nobody. So on at least half of our green card applications, no one applies. And the other half, they do apply, but we're able to disqualify them for various reasons. They don't meet the degree or the skills or the years of experience for whatever reason. So don't be scared off by the labor certification. If an employer is willing to sponsor you, again, the labor certification has a higher success rate than a national interest waiver.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, does an EB2 application require a sponsor?
So there's two types: national interest waiver, no; labor certification, yes. So it depends.
Thank you. Well, I'm waiting for my green card. My current OPT status is expired. Can I stay in the US?
Well, it depends on what stage of the green card process that you're in. So if you have filed the I-45 adjustment of status to permanent resident, even a day before your OPT expired or your grace period, yes, you're legally authorized to stay in the United States. If you have not filed the I-45 and you're at a different earlier stage, then there's a good chance that you're not legally authorized to be in the United States.
Thank you. How would we know if our country qualifies for us to apply for the diversity lottery, or can we just apply for it?
So the government actually has a very great website, and I wish I knew it off the top of my head. You really just have to Google it. I'll see if I can pull it up while you're reading another question. But and they have like a chart, and they list what, which countries can apply and whatnot. So diversity, let's see if I can find it real quick. It's actually on the Department of State's website. So I'll get the website. It has a really excellent explanation about when you can submit an entry. By the way, there's certain times of year where you can, and it usually opens up in October. So it's actually closed right now. You couldn't submit it. You could go online and read it, but usually they open it up on October 1st when the fiscal year begins for immigration. So let me see if I can put the website here, because it's kind of a long, address, which is a little weird. I wish we could truncate it, but I'll try to put it in the Q&A for you to find it. But if you just Google diversity lottery, the first website that will come up is travel.state.gov, and it takes you to their landing page tells you all about the lottery and how to apply.
Great, thank you. Okay, looks like we have a question about STEM extension. So that is, I'm just going to refer that person to advising hours with ISSO, and I'd be happy to speak with you during that time. Okay, and this is a follow-up question to, I think, a question that you had answered earlier about an F1 student who is about to file for OPT. So should they not file for a green card as a dependent of H1?
Okay. Sorry, I'm just reading it due to. Did I get any benefit? Should I not file? So no, as a dependent, so if you have an F1 now, you don't have to be, just because you're married, you don't have to be on their dependent status. So if you're an F1 now and you're about to file your OPT, you're actually going to stay in F1 status the whole time you're on your OPT and potentially STEM OPT. So you can file for a green card as a dependent of your H1 if you want to leverage that OPT and continue working on it. It's just really heavy timing restrictions. Like, you're going to want to wait until after the OPT has been approved before you file it. You're going to need to coordinate it around travel plans. And sometimes it might be faster to, depending on when you're about to file, like if your spouse is ready to file the green card today, you could file it and file for the EAD work card based on the green card, and maybe get it at the same time you would have gotten your OPT anyway. But if they're not ready to file that final step for several more months, the OPT may be faster. Really, you just have to talk. You got to figure out with your spouse and their lawyers, when are they going to be ready to file that green card, and just coordinate it and ask them which one could be faster, OPT versus EAD, based on the green card, and go that route. But, and you may end up filing separately, the green card separately, months later after your spouse does. And that's fine too.
Great, thank you. Okay. My sister is a citizen and I am on F1 visa. Can she sponsor me based on family sibling relationships?
She can. But there's a preference. You're going to want to Google the Visa Bulletin. And in the Visa Bulletin, there's not only charts for employment-based categories, but there are charts for family-based. And a citizen, a brother or sister of a US citizen, is family-based FB, fourth preference, 4. And I was going to look at, I can look at it real quick because I have the Visa Bulletin on my, you know, right, always up, literally every day, all day long, because I go to it so often. A family-based fourth preference right now has a very long wait because they're the bottom preference category. So for example, if you were from all other countries like France, your your sibling would have had to file the first step of the sponsorship in 2006. So that's about a 14-year wait. So while they can do it, it's a long game. It's not going to get you a green card. It's not going to get you work authorization. It's not going to get you anything for close to 14 years. It's even longer if you come from some other countries like Mexico, Philippines, India, or China. So, and once you file an I-130 petition, you're going to have to forever on every application, every student, anything that it says, have you applied for an immigrant visa? You're going to have to say yes, because that is an immigrant visa. And so there's some non-immigrant intent issues. So it's something you're really going to want to consider if you want to do.
Great, thank you. Does OPT have premium processing, or can you expedite the process? Unfortunately, no. And even if there is a way to expedite the process, but like Mary said earlier, it would be rejected. Okay, my F1 visa expires in June and passport in November. I can renew my passport from the US, but not my visa. My company is sponsoring my H1 this year. Is it recommended to go back to my home country to renew my F1 visa with the company applying for the H? My STEM has not been approved yet. However, receipt is received. Country of citizenship is India.
So you do not need to have a valid F1 visa in your passport to apply for an H. In fact, I will even apply for H's for people whose passport has expired. There's a question on there of like, does it, is it expired? But I just simply write, it's in the, extension process, due to COVID, we can't get it extended right now. And they're pretty lenient. There's no actual requirement that your visa, and it's a little lenient on the passport, actually be valid at the time of filing. So if they're going to apply for you, sponsoring you for an H, and you get the H-1B, there's no need for you to make a special trip to India, but just know that after October of next year, the next trip home, you will have to apply for an H-1B to come back. And you're going to want to have a valid passport at that time, because you're not going to want to put the H in an expiring passport, and they may not even put it in an expiring passport. So just, you might want to work on that now. But also your lawyer is going to tell you if you do win the lottery and they go to file an H-1B for you as a change of status from within the United States, but sometime between April and June, when the window opens, they're going to tell you you can't travel, because if you travel, it may abandon certain parts of your H-1B application. So it seems like you're probably going to stay put for a while, because you don't need to travel. And if anything, you're going to get stuck abroad potentially and miss the window on applying for the H-1B. So again, you really got to hash this out with your lawyer, but you should be fine to not have to go get a new visa.
Great, thank you. Okay. Is there any experience requirement for the EB-2 national interest waiver? I'm recent graduate working with the CDC on COVID-19. There's
no experience requirement. There is a degree. You must have at least a master's degree. So that's the bare minimum, but there's no experience. It's just, again, it's not just one of the prong tests is that you are well positioned to advance your field of endeavor. So that's obviously talking about future work, but a lot of times we talk about, well, what's their past work been? What accomplishments have you had in this field? What have you done so far? So if you don't have a ton of experience, they in theory could use it against you, but there's no hard and fast rule that you have to prove that you have 3 years of work experience or 5 years of work experience. You can do it straight out of a degree program.
Great, thank you. Are our chances for H-1B lottery weekend due to the current system this is my second chance?
I mean, I don't want to say it's weird. A lot of things affect your eligibility, and the biggest one for lottery right now is how many people apply. So if a lot of people apply this year because the registration process, they've been through it, is really easy, and the numbers spike and go to 300,000 people apply this year, yeah, then your lottery chances go down. If COVID is wreaking havoc on the economy and not a lot of employers are hiring right now, the numbers might go down this year. It's really hard to tell. They might only get 150,000 registrations this month because, the economy just stinks. And then it might benefit you. Your chances will go up. So it just sort of depends on how many people apply, and we never know until after the fact.
Great, thank you. Can my employer file for H-1B right now while I'm still waiting for my post-OPT EAD?
Yes.
Can we do multiple H-1B applications from different employers?
Yes. As many employers as you want can register you. Just not more than one from the same employer, or they'll reject all of them. So like if you have one employer register you 3 times, all 3 will get rejected. Not just like the extra 2. So just make sure that they only register you once. But yes, multiple employers is fine.
Great, thank you. Can I apply for EB-1B through my employer? I am from India.
You must apply for an EB-1B through your employer. It has to have an employer sponsor.
Great, thank you. Okay. I am from Cuba. Can I get out of the US within my first year and still be eligible to apply for the Cuban Adjustment Act?
I unfortunately cannot answer that question. There are very few immigration attorneys who know that well enough. There is a lawyer at our firm, his name is Owen, that might have come across this. He's been doing this for like 35 years. So he might have come across this. So maybe email info@iandoli.com, and maybe one of the other lawyers in the office would be able to answer that. But I've not had any Cuban clients, so it's just not on my radar.
Excellent. Thank you, Mary. How many years my spouse has to wait in H4 to get the EAD?
Well, right now, the only H4 EADs are allowed are those of you who are already in the green card process. So you filed an I-140 and you're in a backlog category. So you're from India and China. So it's very limited in scope of who will actually get this. So the Biden administration wants to open it to everybody, but again, it's a rule that's going to go through House and Congress and get battled back and forth. So it could be 6 months if the rule passes. It could be years. It could just never happen if Congress doesn't agree that that's actually something of importance to keep in the new bill. They can remove it. So I wouldn't rely on an H4 EAD anytime soon unless you're in the green card process and you're Indian or Chinese.
Great, thank you. Just scrolling back to the top here. Okay, my green card application that my family applied is in the approval stage, the last stage of NVC going through documents. Not only that my employer also applied for the H-1B. Is this okay for USCIS or any department? I do not know when my green card interview will be appointed since my country is suffering from military coup.
Yes, so you can definitely go through the H-1B process. I highly recommend it while you're waiting for your immigrant visa because they're so backlogged. It could take a year or 2. We don't know. So there will be no problem. The H-1B is non-immigrant and immigrant intent. We call it dual intent. So you'll have no problem, assuming, hopefully, fingers crossed, you win the lottery.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Can green card process be converted from EB3 to EB1 while working in the US? What is the most appropriate way to do it?
It's basically refiling. I mean, you don't just mail in an application and say, I suddenly want to be EB1. You have to, if an employer sponsors you for an EB3 and now you think you qualify for an EB1, that's a whole separate application, a whole separate list of qualifications. So either you, if it's an EB1A, or an employer, if it's an EB1B, would separately sponsor you. Now, because you have an EB3 that you've presumably, it sounds like you filed, you have a priority date from that EB3. You get to keep your priority date. Anytime you change between like EB2 to EB3, let's say you filed an EB3 and then you went and got a master's and now you're eligible for EB2. You can then suddenly do an EB2, but you start the process over. You know, you do the labor certification, the I-140, you do it all over again. So it's double the cost to the employer. But you get to always keep and use your very first priority date. So we see that a lot as people's career progress, that they do refile a whole other application, but then they get to use an old priority date. And that's great for if you're from India and China. No one does this unless you're from India and China, because your priority date for an EB3 versus an EB1 from France is the same, but or most of the time is the same. Rarely do we see it different. But India and China, we see this happen a lot. So you'll keep your priority date, but they got to start from scratch.
Excellent, thank you. I'm a student from Hong Kong. So in terms of immigration laws, are Hong Kong, Macau treated differently as China?
Yes, yes. So the Trump administration, though, did pass some rule sometime in 2020, in the middle of COVID, it's all blending, that said that Hong Kong now must be treated as similar as to China. But then the Department of State and USCIS came out and said, no, we're not really sure about that. And so they haven't been making it you're treated equally to China yet. We're sort of waiting on the edge of our seats for some sort of final determination, because I have a lot of China clients from Hong Kong, and if you switch them over to being, you know, we call it their country of chargeability to China, now suddenly they're going to be backlogged for 3 to 5 years for a green card. But so far they have not been, they have been treating it differently for now.
Great, thank you. On what basis can we apply for asylum? Is there any eligibility?
So that's another one of those things. Our firm does not handle asylum cases. It's a specialty, but you can email info@iandole.com. We have a referral list for asylum lawyers that we like in the area, and we can send you out their contact information.
Great, thank you. Okay. If you are on F2, can you become a college student? If yes, must you leave the US before applying for an F1 visa? So yes, you can study on the F2, but if I recall correctly, you cannot study full-time on the F2. You also are not eligible to work on campus or for any employment for that matter. And yes, if you want to apply for the F1, you would need to do a change of status, or you would need to depart the US and apply for the F1 at a US embassy or consulate after receiving your initial Form I-20. And feel free to contact ISSO during our advising hours. An advisor here would be more than happy to speak with you about the change of status process or any of your options. Okay. My husband just filed for a green card and he entered my details in his application, and I may file for OPT in August or December. Please suggest.
So there's obviously various stages of the green card, and what you're probably talking about is the I-140 stage, because the first stage of labor certification, they don't ask about spouses. The I-140 immigrant visa petition does ask about spouses, and you just put your name, maybe your birthday and your country, and then that's it. So my advice is that is not an immigrant visa for which you have filed. So you, if ever asked, I have no problems if you want to get OPT, it is not yours. But the day your husband's I-140 is approved and you go to file the I-45 adjustment of status, he's going to do one, the lawyers are going to file one for you, and you sign that and you mail it in. Now you personally have filed for a green card, and it will affect your OPT. So again, it sort of depends on timing. If his I-140 is approved in like 2 weeks, and you can file an adjustment of status in this summertime, that the work card for the green card might come faster than OPT and be better. If you're from India and China and he's just filing the I-140 and listed your name, you're not going to file for the green card for years and years from now. You're going to need to do the OPT, and you'll be okay. So again, you have to talk to the lawyers about timing, what what exact stage are they at? And when could you potentially file the I-45? Because that's going to be the application where it screws up your OPT.
Great, thank you. This STEM extension 1, I am going to just type in the answer to that student. When an employer registers for H-1B in March, do we have to care about prevailing wage, or can we adjust that later?
No, so when an employer registers in March, they don't list the wage. They have nothing. Maybe next year they might have to list what level wage, but this year the wage is not listed. So the prevailing wage doesn't matter right now. When you go to file the application between April and June 30th, they have to file a labor condition application as part of that that says what is the wage that they're going to be paying as of October 1st. Not of the date of filing, but on October 1st, 2021, what's the wage your employer is going to pay you? So you can figure out the wage in that filing window of 90 days.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, you can have more than one company apply for H-1B for you. Does that mean that we will have a higher chance to get an
Yes, it does mean you will have a higher chance.
Okay. How much does it cost for the H-1B application process?
Approximately $5,000. It changes a little bit. I'm going to say roughly lawyers might charge around $2,500. $2,000 to $3,000 really is the range. So we'll just break it about $2,500 for lawyers. But then there's several filing fees, $460, $500, and then a training fee. Depends on the size of the company. $750 if it's sorry, I have something to refer. $750 if there's less than 25 employees, $1,500 if there's more than 25. So on average, we're looking at around, just rough figure, $5,000, and an employer by law must pay for it. You can also then premium process the H. That's an additional $2,500. That's the only fee that can be paid for by you. And it's more peace of mind. You don't really need an approval in May or June because it doesn't become effective until October. So you can let regular processing do its course and hopefully get an approval from in August or September and never pay for premium processing. But, you know, obviously it's more like 5,000, but the size of the company really has a big impact on what the total would be.
Okay. And well, follow-up question to that. Can you help pay the attorney fee or your employer when filing for the H-1?
By law, your employer has to pay for everything.
Excellent. Thank you. When can country-based green card bill will be passed?
We have no idea. That's it may never pass. So it's gonna be comprehensive immigration reform is something that, like I said, it's been tried dozens and dozens of times over the last 10 years and nothing has ever passed. So it's, you know, it's not an easy thing that if it does get passed, it'll be like an impressive miracle if Biden gets it through. He has the best chance anyone has had in a decade, but still, they're going to take months and months to fight about it. And eventually it may just drop off the radar if they get nowhere with it.
Thank you. Okay, we have a final question here. And thank you so much, Mary, for your
No problem.
and for your service today. I came to the US on the H-4 and I got a change of status to the F-1, which was approved recently. Is it advisable to travel to my home country for visa stamping or wait for an H-1B sponsorship?
Well, going home right now to get a stamping isn't going to increase your chances for an H-1B. It's only going to increase your chances of getting stuck abroad trying to process it in embassy. So if you do not have an emergency to go home, I wouldn't recommend it. And maybe just wait until, if you want to go home in the fall, just getting an H. Because if you go get an F-1 now, come back, file your H, and it becomes effective in October, you're just going to have to get another visa again in October for the H. So again, if you don't have to travel, there's no need to. You know, don't do it unless it's an emergency for some other reason, like a family member, you know, or something.
Excellent, thank you. My STEM OPT application is received by USCIS and I got a receipt. If I want to change employers, can I do it? Yes, you can do it. We do actually have a specific guide that's on the forms and guide section of our website. If you want to check that out. In the meantime, we would recommend that you contact us during advising hours so that we can walk you through the process of what's going to be required so that we can update your application while it's being adjudicated by USCIS. Awesome. That was the final question. So I just want to say again, thank you so much to Mary. We are so thankful for you being here today and for providing time out of your very busy schedule to provide this presentation and to answer so many questions. So thank you again, everybody, for those that attended, and I hope you all have a fantastic weekend.
Yep, and everyone, good luck. Anyone going through the lottery this month, I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you, Mary.
Emily, have a great night, great weekend.
Take care. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Okay, bye.